Actually, let me mention a brief anecdote about that.
Yes.
The reason that the Chronovisor was first placed at the General Manufacturing Company facility in Convent Station, New Jersey, is because they had been the map-making facility for Standard Oil during the war, because they had been making maps for service stations, for gas stations. And they had done all the logistical mapping for England and France and so forth, Germany and Italy. And after the war, they became closely involved with the mapping functions of the Defense Logistics Agency. And in fact, the ITT Defense Communications facility that we were taken to travel from November 5th of 1971 via Chronovision to the year 2013 to remotely view the condition of the U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., was immediately adjacent to what was then the Army Logistics Agency, which then became the Defense Logistics Agency. So they were actively trying to map the future just as they had mapped Europe during the war 25 years previously. So again, this is discrepant with the public and with even professional historians' mapping of the 20th century, but I think the significance of my account is that 25 years after the end of World War II, where the U.S. defense community had been involved in mapping other countries, by 1970 they were mapping the past and future remotely. So yes, I believe they have an extensive database of information about the past and future now 40 years since.
Andrew, let's see here. I just want to ask you before, are you interested in coming back to the program soon? There's just too much to discuss, and we haven't even gone into the Mars issue, and of course I want to hear more about the future as well. Do you have time for us?
I certainly would like to do another 2 hours on Mars. I thought I'd go into Project Pegasus today because perhaps during the next interview we could talk about the experiences I had between 1968 and 2008, where as a result of the intelligence community identifying me in childhood as somebody in a public sense being principally associated with the finding of different forms of evidence of life on Mars in NASA and the ESA's own photographs, that they took measures to give me information to just keep me on that path. They weren't grooming me. They didn't sort of sit me down and give me extensive lectures about Mars. They just showed me certain forms of evidence from my Mars research, and in fact were in possession of my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, which I was permitted to read and urged to remember as much as possible from in 1971.
Really?
So part of the significance and why I have to talk about Project Pegasus in explaining my current Mars writings is that the very landmark paper that I published last year as a 47-year-old, 46 going on 47, I was permitted to read almost 40 years previously as a 10-year-old. And it was my paper from 2008 with the Arial, type fonts and everything, it said copyright 2008 by Andrew D. Basiago. And I said to my dad, what's the D? And he goes, oh, it's from your confirmation name. I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and I hadn't gone through confirmation yet, so I didn't have a middle name. So here I'm reading a paper of mine not just from the future, but with a middle initial that I didn't even possess yet.
Yes.
So it was the paper that I published in 2008. The Defense Department was in possession of my paper before I wrote it in real time from my perspective. And indeed, my dad said, okay, Andy, the purpose of this exercise, take as many hours as you need. I'm going to leave. I was actually recuperating from an illness in the guest bedroom of our house in Jersey, the sick room that my mom would allow us to recuperate in or have us recuperate in. And my dad said, Andy, the purpose of this exercise is to read your paper from 2008, look at the pictures, read the captions, and try to remember as much detail as you can. We want you to remember as many of the facts in the text and the pictures, because someday you're going to write this paper. And we want to be sure it has as much data about Mars as possible.
Yeah.
So that statement by my dad certainly indicates that by 1971, they were aware of the multiverse and knew that my writing of my paper, or even whether or not I wrote it, could possibly be expressed in the future across divergent timelines. And they wanted to use what I'm calling quantum enfoldment. They wanted to take the data they had from the future in that version of my paper that they had from that timeline they had taken it from, and have me read it so that when I wrote the paper in real time, it would have the enriched value of me having seen it in the past. Now, skeptics will say, Andy, you said that there was some brainwashing when you were in this parapsychology unit. Maybe you were just brainwashed with a paper they had written to write it, 37 years later.
Right, right.
But that's not possible because they didn't have the photographs that are in the paper, and the paper had the very photographs that ended up in my paper. So that scenario wasn't plausible. It wasn't possible in 1971. They didn't have the rover Spirit sitting on the western edge of the home plate plateau in 1971 for me to analyze NASA image PIA 10214. It hadn't been taken yet.
Yeah.
So the paper had to be from the future. The very fact that I recognized the image, was recognizing the images as I excised them from NASA's photographs, or in that case from that single photograph, and placed them in my paper, constitutes a proof that the paper I was shown and asked to read and remember was my actual paper from 2008.
That's just incredible. Okay, so we can say here then let's hold off on Mars specifically and the discussion about the future for now then, and return to this in part 2 soon, and we'll talk more about that off air here in a while to set that up. But I want to ask you a few more questions surrounding this issue then, and we can kind of begin to round things up on that for now. But has the project Pegasus ended, as you know, or is it still continuing?
Well, initially it ended for me at the end of the summer of '72. Well, actually, let me give you several data points here that I think are significant. In the summer of '73, that my father and I had accessed from November of '71, where we jumped forward in time, and we spent the summer of '73 living at 20 Grand Canyon Avenue in White Rock, New Mexico. Okay, it was a summer sublet. Okay. When we were at lunch with Connie Chavez, we returned to the house, and my dad found that the project files had been stolen. In fact, he initially accused Connie. He was so disturbed that the files were missing that he said, "Connie, did you take them?" And she said, "Ray, not even." Okay. What the files were that I know of were the log sheets for people who were teleporting into New Mexico and when they were leaving. That they were tracing when they arrived and when they left, because they had to keep them on the schedule that somehow related to how to get them back at the right time and the location on the East Coast that they had originally jumped from. In my case, back to Woodridge, New Jersey, back to Curtis Wright. Okay, so there was a theft in the summer of '73 from that house of some kind of project files. I never found out from who, but that event was so destabilizing, such a threat, that my dad said to me and Connie, "You have 5 minutes to pack." I went into the little bedroom there that I was sleeping at night with churning my legs, dreaming that I was running back to New Jersey. I was so homesick that summer. And I had like this restless leg syndrome where I was falling asleep dreaming I was running home, 2,000 miles home. But so Connie went to the kitchen and started throwing pots and pans and boxes, and I actually had a comb, a little boy's comb that I had put in my briefcase fall out that I found on my 2004 trip that had shrunk in the sun. It was this little remnant of a little comb I had dropped back in summer of '73 in the front yard of that house when I went back to try to ask the owner if we could go inside the house to, as part of my research. And in any case, so there was a theft of project data. Later in the 1970s, this would be a couple years after we moved to California in 1972, I would estimate it was around 1974, something came on the TV that reminded me of the project. It may have been a report about something that DARPA was working on, or somebody like a Ray Bradbury was speculating on the teleportation that was being shown, that had been shown on Star Trek or something like that.
Right.
And I turned to my dad and said, "What happened to that project we were on?" And he said, "Nobody knows." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Somebody didn't report in as they were supposed to, and the whole thing fell apart like a house of cards." And then he explained that everybody in the project had reporting requirements to some other person in the project. And they were instructed that if there was ever a breach of security, such as project files being stolen, or somebody having a heart attack on their way to work and therefore you couldn't maintain the reporting within the system of intelligence people that were on the project, everybody was basically just supposed to skedaddle and just not talk about the project and act like it never existed. So that's what we were told when we did a cannonball run to Los Angeles from Albuquerque after the project files were stolen to meet with one of the project officials in Pasadena, who was an engineer for the Ralph M. Parsons Company. I don't think it was at the Parsons facility because they had just moved out there to Los Angeles in 72, 73. It was a Parsons official